So, I haven't released a video in around a month or so. I've been incredibly busy over the last few weeks, and some personal stuff in my own life that I've had to deal with. Nothing out of the ordinary, just run-of-the-mill life administration that seems to have taken over. But I'm not too fussed at this point because I don't have hundreds or even tens of subscribers yet, so I'm not really feeling that responsible to anyone at this point. Perhaps that will change in the future, hopefully. I had an issue recently, and it got me thinking about a previous part of my life and what my political beliefs were at that point. For those of you that don't know who Stefan Molyneux is, as it will say in the title of this video, he's a libertarian anarcho capitalist, I think he would probably refer to himself as, although he always avoids labels when people try and put them on him. And Stefan Molyneux was a big part of my own political journey when I found his work online, because he was the first person to introduce me to race and IQ and the science surrounding that. I think it was in his interview with Jared Taylor. I'd already been listening to probably a few hundred hours of Stefan Molyneux stuff when I got onto his Jared Taylor interview, and it just kind of completely blew my mind. First, I didn't believe it. I thought, this is right, this is really out there, and I thought, oh god, actually this guy is a bit of a nutter, Stefan Molyneux. Maybe I was wrong about him. Maybe he isn't just an economic commentator. And then I listened to the whole interview, looked into the bell curve, looked into the science around it, looked into a lot of other reports, looked into a lot of IQ studies, and went through every single argument that I could think of against why it was real. The IQ tests were fake and all that kind of stuff. They weren't a good measure of G. Edward Dutton is around now. I really like his videos because he explains it very well, but he's only been on the scene very recently. So back then, this is a good few years ago, probably 2016 now. Anyway, and eventually I was convinced, and I thought, right, so Stefan Molyneux, he's really on the money. He gets this stuff. And along with that kind of red pill realization on some of the truths of the world, that obviously when you adopt race and IQ into your belief structure, a lot of the other dominoes in our political system and our social system in the countries we live in fall alongside that. Everything makes sense all of a sudden when you actually realise the facts behind differences in group populations and how those differences will affect how well they do in society against other groups. Everything becomes obvious. The great race debate of wealth disparities and health disparities and all these other disparities just become completely obvious, and you think, God, how did I never even think of this before? And it's because this information is hidden from you. And then you realise that very intelligent people are deluding themselves. You've got these politicians who've made a career out of trying to end disparities between different races, and you think, well, we know why, and you're being paid millions, and all these millions of people are supporting you to carry out a delusion that's never going to solve any kind of disparity problem, because fundamentally you're targeting the wrong people. Anyway, that's by the by. But as I said, Stefan Molyneux was a big eye-opener for me. Now, along with that, I really got into his other economic philosophies around anarcho capitalism and libertarianism and reduction of the state, and that the state is the cause of many of the problems in the West. And I really bought into this. Taxation is theft is another big one, which essentially it is. Even to this day, I'm not a libertarian or an anarcho capitalist, but I do agree that you can't really argue that taxation isn't theft. But over the last 4 years or so, I've moved quite far beyond that. I think the starting point for people is conservative economics, and then they get into social policy, and then they get into kind of semi-dissident beliefs like Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, people like that. Then they might get into Stefan Molyneux, and then Douglas Murray perhaps, and then further down the line into the real people who are really on the money. you know, people like Mark Collette, people like Jared Taylor, maybe even people like Jesse Lee Peterson. There's loads of them you could name, but that's the kind of the rabbit hole, and that's where it starts and ends. Now, as I said, I believed that for quite a while, and then over the last couple of years, I've slowly started to drift more towards socialism. Not because I'm a leftist, but I do think that capitalism is the cause of a lot of the problems that we face. And the more I think about it, the more I have thought about it, and the older I get, the more I am certain that capitalism is not a very healthy ideology for Europeans and for the societies that, you know, we should be living in. Now, anarcho capitalism, Stefan Molyneux' beliefs, although again, as I said, he would disagree with any kind of label, but roughly that's probably where I'd place him, is the belief that under a capitalist system without a government, the world would be a much better place. Essentially, there's no regulation. People form their own regulation on each other, and things would run more efficiently, and people would be happier. And you know, when you listen to enough of someone talking about this, hundreds and hundreds of hours of them, it makes complete sense. In theory, it makes complete sense. You know, these people are hardcore anti-communists, but what they don't realise, or well, perhaps they do, but they're two strings of the same bow, really, because they work in theory, but not in reality. That's the big fall down of communism, is that in theory it would be great, but in reality it's fundamentally opposed to human nature and human biodiversity and genetic reality. And it's the same effectively with anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism. It's just not in line with human nature, you know, or anything that we've seen. And a good example I'll give you of this is that I remember him having he does these call-in shows where listeners call in with their problems or their questions, and he'll spend a good hour talking to them. And one of the main problems someone highlighted is, I think they said, well, how would the roads be built under an anarcho-capitalist society? Who would build the roads? Obviously currently the state being responsible for that. And Stefan Molyneux scoffed at him and said, oh, people always ask me this. How would X get done? How would Y get done? That would be ironed out, or something to that degree, as in, the theory is this, we just sort the rest of it out. I shouldn't have to tell you how the roads will be built. That's a stupid question, basically. You know, as in saying that, well, do I have to explain how every single thing in society would be done to justify that this is a valid political belief? And at the time, obviously being a fan of Stefan Molyneux, I thought, yeah, what an idiot this caller is. And looking back, a recent experience that I've had, you know, got me thinking about this again. Even though it's quite dated now, Stefan Molyneux's long been banned on YouTube, so it's not exactly like I'm talking about this in some kind of current zeitgeist. But I thought, no, he's wrong. The roads wouldn't get built, you know, without some sort of state there, overarching state, because especially in a capitalist system, people are inherently individualistic. People are pressured, and most people are lazy. Lazy people are useless effectively anyway. They could have all the time in the world, they will procrastinate. Busy people fill the time with so much stuff, they don't have time to do anything else generally. That's what we see currently. Everyone I know who is doing well for themselves never has a spare moment, especially if you have a family as well. You know, and you want any kind of traditional family where a man is working, they don't have a moment in the day spare outside of working and looking after the family and, you know, keeping fit, that kind of stuff. And I'll tell you about the experience I had recently and why it got me thinking about this. I had a membership somewhere. I won't go into detail about who that was. I don't want to you know, give anyone any bad PR, but I had a membership for a service, and effectively they conned me out of a month's membership. My membership was due to end. I hadn't cancelled any kind of direct debit or anything, thinking that they would cancel it. They took a direct debit when they shouldn't have, and they wouldn't give it me back. And I complained all the way to the top of the complaint hierarchy, and the head honcho there, basically when it got escalated to them, they point blank refused, even though I went through all the contracts that I had with them, and this is a fairly, small value service, but the actual company offering the service are absolutely massive. So, compared to me, I'm just some small fry compared to this corporate monolith. And they basically got to the point where I said, look, if you don't sort this out, I'm going to take you to small claims court. And they were effectively like, well, look, we're not going to do anything. Basically, sue us or piss off was their attitude. And for the amount of money we're talking, it just wasn't worth paying even the cost of the small claim court without a guaranteed win. So in that sense, as a consumer, you are completely shafted. There's nothing in place protecting you. There's nothing in place protecting me. I can't go anywhere. The ombudsman and these regulatory bodies set up by the government are completely toothless, and they don't work at all, and they're so inundated with people's requests they probably never get back to you, even if you did email them. Now, you might think, well, look how bad the state operates this system. I would say, well, the state doesn't have our interest in heart. They care more about the corporation than they do about the consumer, or the only thing we need to do is flip that on its head. But when I thought about, well, hang on a minute, I don't know why the thought came to me, but in a stateless society, you just have these corporations just riding roughshod over every single consumer in the nation effectively. Nobody would be able to create a body to oppose these people. Now, Stefan Molyneux would probably say in this scenario that, well, enough disgruntled consumers would get together and we'd form some kind of trade organisation or some kind of regulator, and we'd have a list of all the companies, let's say, I don't know, in some kind of sector. Let's say that there's a sector for, I don't know, mobile phone providers, although that wasn't my example, but if enough people had disgruntled, if enough disgruntled people had bad experience with a certain mobile phone provider, well, it would flag up on our site. So a consumer could go to our regulatory site, we'd say, these are the people we trust, these are the people who operate ethically and who abide by their contracts, and these are the people on our blacklist. And we'd get enough power and enough PR and enough representation to get that across to everyone, and so it would be in these corporations' interests to act in a lawful way against their contract. Otherwise, they would lose business in the future. And it sounds good in theory, but nobody's going to do this. Nobody has the time to do this. Nobody has the resources to do this. And even if they did, the amount of capital behind these huge businesses, they'd just be able to shut it down. They'd just be able to absolutely crush you. In the modern world, let's say this did happen, I decided to start a website naming and shaming these organisations. Well, if it actually got, number one, I need massive resources to actually get it out there in online advertising. The route of that would be pay-per-click via Google. This is just a real life example. Well, that organisation, as soon as they caught wind of it, could just destroy me on Google keywords and just bid the keywords that I was using up so much no one would ever find my advert, and I wouldn't be able to afford doing it anymore. There's all sorts of routes and means they could disrupt that, even if people did get there. In reality, I don't have the time to be doing that, and I can't find enough other people who have the time to be doing that. You need efficient, hard-working people to create organisations like this, and efficient and hard-working people don't really have much spare capacity like I find in my own life. And so, essentially, relying on the goodwill of people to run a society just isn't. It's not a political belief that carries any weight. This is effectively why the state was created, because people don't generally have the time to do this. So they created states effectively to manage this on their behalf, to represent the people. Now I agree the state has got completely out of control and it doesn't represent the people at all, but it doesn't mean that you have to completely rip apart the essence of what a state is. Now the other aspect of that is capitalism. In this anarcho-capitalist society, they're assuming we have all the same principles as we do now of capitalism. But the problem with capitalism is it makes people very, very individualistic. And if there's no regulation at all, there's no social system, it's a pure form of capitalism where it's effectively just competition everywhere, and if you fail then you fall on your arse, and if you succeed then, well, screw everyone else. It's going to make people less inclined to create any kind of collective organisation. You know, an organisation, a trade body or a regulatory organisation would require some kind of collective spirit for people to actually come together and want to do something. That, you know, doing this project, like I said, of creating this board where you'd name and shame bad providers. You know, I wouldn't be making any money out of that. I'd be doing it because I was so disgruntled with the company, but I'd have to put hours and hours of my time and money into this. You know, in an anarcho-capitalist society, what the hell's the point in doing that if I could be spending that, if there's no social safety net and I can't go anywhere other than some local church is going to give me some bread if I lose my job or whatever, and maybe put a roof over my head. What the hell would be the point in spending any time doing anything else other than basically surviving and amassing as much wealth as possible? You know, if there's no pension system or anything like that, you know, people would have to spend the whole entire working life just saving every penny for when they retire. You wouldn't have time to do any of this kind of stuff. You wouldn't have time to have a family. You know, it would be more inclined for women to work because, you know, if you wanted to create a better life as possible for yourself, and as I said, there's no safety net. There's nothing socialising to pay for all your healthcare, all of your bills, all of your children's healthcare, insurance. You know, at private market rates, which would inevitably go up. I don't agree that it would be much cheaper under private organisations. They're going to look to, you know, what would stop health monopolies just forming some kind of cabal and putting the prices through the roof. You know, if no one else could provide that service, people would be screwed. Effectively, the only mediating factor is a state that can regulate. But it would instill an ideology of complete selfishness within people, and so anything that would actually be good for the collective that wasn't profit-based would just be pointless. There'd be no incentive to do it. There'd be no incentive to have a wife at home looking after your children. She may as well be out working. There'd be no incentive to stop your kids working under the age of kind of 12 or whatever. You know, all of these protections that we have in society come from the barrel of a gun, effectively, in the form of the state. I know anarcho-capitalists and libertarians hate that. You know, again, taxation is theft. Yes, it is theft, but life is a game of suffering, and you suffering by having a bit of money stolen from you sometimes isn't as bad as someone suffering because they can't work because they've been blown up by a bomb in a Middle Eastern country and they need the government to give them some welfare. You know, it's a game of suffering. No one's going to get away without any suffering in this world, and it's kind of like, well, look, if you have to have 20% of your income taken from you, but you've still got enough to have a nice life, well, as far as suffering goes, it's pretty minuscule, isn't it, really? You know, you don't even have someone coming around beating you up and taking your money. You know, it just comes out of your paycheck. So to believe that we could form a world where there was no kind of hierarchy or any kind of structure like that is just completely naive and childlike, sorry, not childless. Again, it all comes back to this theory. It's a theoretical that doesn't work in principle, and would be probably terrible if it did work. You know, you'd be in like an anarcho-capitalist state is effectively the Wild West, and people didn't live in the Wild West for very long before they progressed out of it. Anyway, I'm not going to make this any longer than it has to be, but it was just a few thoughts on where I see the failings of anarcho-capitalism, and it was just this scenario that brought it back. You know, all those years ago I bought into that, and would recite all these talking points to people and to their annoyance probably, and I've probably done a full 180 somewhat on it now. But yeah, that's where I see the failings of Stefan Molyneux, and probably why he's lost a lot of his, I know being banned on YouTube was one, but I think a lot of his subscriber base, the hardcore libertarians will stay with him. A lot of the transient people who haven't really made their political mind up yet, like me, will have probably moved on from him now. He had his big break in kind of 2015-16, and a lot of those people are probably where I am now, or have just kind of disappeared altogether. So yeah, hope you found that interesting.